Welcome back to Biz 15, the Yorkshire Business Podcast. We're on episode 8 and we're going to continue the theme of staff wellbeing. So I'm joined, as always, by Andrew Rowley. So straight into it, Andrew. We've discussed staff wellbeing and the importance of staff wellbeing for any organisation, really. But from your point of view, what's the impact of poor staff wellbeing in an organisation?
Okay, well, we touched on one in the last episode, and that was decreased productivity levels. And as I said, we look at productivity as being if it's a factory, but productivity is just as important in an office-based environment. The other key one is illness, staff absence, staff being away from work, which feeds into the previous one, obviously feeds into productivity, also has a big negative impact on the staff that have to pick up the slack from a member of staff being off. There's poor engagement both with somebody's role and with their colleagues, which, needless to say, both elements of that actually lead on to further negativity and can create upset amongst the wider team. And I guess underpinning all of it is it's the morale. Again, linking this into one of our earlier episodes when we were talking about the culture of an organisation, there's one sure way of ruining the culture, and that's having a poor morale throughout the team. And I think that's one of the biggest things. No,
I think it's massively important to take into consideration for any organisation. I know I've mentioned this previously, but it all does link back to productivity, and it links back to how happy an individual is to come into work. And you spend more time at work than you do with your family, so you've got to be happy spending time in your place of work, because if you're not, then the business needs to do something about it, because ultimately they're paying this person's wages. They have a duty of care for that individual when they're here, to make sure that they're here to do the job that they're paid to do and get the relative outputs from that role, whether that be sales, production, team leading, quality, management, whatever it is. But without having that right infrastructure to be able to create that positive working environment and culture, the morale is going to be ridiculously poor. And you know what it's like. I'm sure we've both worked in places where morale's low, not necessarily down to poor well-being infrastructure, but for example, working in sales, when you're up, and when you're down, you're at rock bottom, especially when you see your pipeline just getting decimated overnight. That creates poor morale, and that's a high-pressured environment. That environment, through no fault of the business, they might have the right infrastructure for staff well-being, but just the nature of that person's role might then have an impact on morale, because if you're having a couple of bad months, that's then going to impact that person's well-being. They're going to be stressed. They're going to have potential issues around motivation, because no one likes failing, everyone likes succeeding. It's just about having that infrastructure from a management side of things to pick that person back up, get them back on the straight and narrow. And without that in place, it's only going to go one way, and that's down.
As a leader, then, how would you say you can monitor the well-being of staff?
Regular one-to-ones, regular catch-ups, regular meetings, communicating. Larger organisations do wellbeing surveys and do it on a regular basis, because things change. So there's no point doing one and leaving it 12 months. A lot of things, something could change overnight for a certain individual. Doing those surveys to understand what is actually happening on the ground, to get the level of information back in a large organisation that you potentially wouldn't be able to do through talking to people. So then you can actually put something in place to do it. When I ran a team of, I think there was about 12 of us in Leeds, each individual in my team was doing a slightly different role. We were all there to do potentially the same thing, but how we did it was different. We had employer engagements, we had advisors, we had account managers, we had job centre advisors, we had branch administrators, in-work support advisors, so on and so forth. Everyone was doing a different role. and some people were remote, some people were field-based, so you wouldn't get to see what was going on. So it was bringing that individual in to see you, making sure that they had a day in the branch, in the office, so you could actually have that regular catch-up, not just from a performance point of view, but actually having a conversation like me and you are now to make sure that that person is fine. We had regular out of work activities, so when there was a specific event in the year, if it was Eid for argument's sake, we'd close the office for half a day, get everyone to make something food related that relates back to Eid, so then we could have that afternoon in the actually in the training room. So it brought us together as a team, which then increased morale, it increased productivity, it increased relationships. For argument's sake, Easter, birthdays, Halloween events, things like that, that, all right, you might not be able to do in a small team, but for larger teams, it really helps. And people look forward to it. People were buzzing for a week before, planning on what they were going to get dressed up as, for argument's sake, planning on what they were going to cook. And it just really helped us as a team bonding. And hopefully, I'm speaking for my team, but we never had any issues around morale, we never had any issues around well-being, or nothing came to fruition anyway, because we had that level of infrastructure in place. And it was target driven, it was a pressured environment, so it wasn't as if we worked in a non-pressured environment, but by having that wraparound additional above and beyond team leader innovative ideas to do something a little bit different, it just helped, and we were all hopefully a happy bunch of people to work around.
And again, it just emphasises that word that we keep coming back to, and it's that communication. It's, by having that communication with it. And I think one thing, it's not something you want to dwell on, and you want to be able to sort it before it gets to that point. But if people do leave the organisation, it's having a good, honest exit interview with them to actually find out the real reason, because okay, it might be too late to stop that member of staff leaving, but if there is something that underpins it, then it's better to find that out and then put something in place. And I think sometimes people's frightened of having that honest exit interview. Yeah,
and like you say, it comes back to communication around you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So if someone's not telling you that there's an issue, you can make an assumption, I guess, but you never make an assumption on something like this. You can potentially have a conversation with someone to say, is everything okay? I've noticed X, Y, and Z. But if they ain't bought into you as an individual, and they've definitely not bought into you as a team leader because you've just not run your team right, if I was in that situation, there'd be absolutely no chance I'd tell my team leader about all the issues that I've got outside of work. I would just speak to someone who I trusted, and ultimately that trust element has to come from the person that's in charge of you, whether that be your boss or your boss's boss, or the organisation that you work for has a duty of care for you as an individual to make sure that everything's put in place for you.
And I think ultimately with that as well, if you've built that right sort of basis for everything there, then let's not forget about it, as the leader or as the person at the top of the pyramid there, sometimes you're the one that's affected by these things as well. And if you've created that right environment, then your team will ultimately be there to support you as well. And I think that's something that people need to obviously remember.
And it comes down, for me, it comes down to what we do in every single business intervention project that we do, whether that be from Lean, whether it be from strategy to ISO. It's about implementation and sustainability. Businesses will potentially have ideas based around staff wellbeing and ideas around creating that friendly environment, and if it's just flavour of the month and it's not bought into and it's not implemented right, then it could be an obstacle in itself to sustaining wellbeing at work. Because if you implement something and if you set something up and it's not implemented correctly and it isn't sustained, it's just a complete waste of time, because people will fall back to their old ways of working or fall back to their old ways of doing things, which could be having a negative impact on their well-being at work.
Yeah. Okay.
From your point of view, Andrew, is there any other main obstacles of sustainability of wellbeing at work?
I think the key one, and you've touched on this a number of times from what we spoke about earlier, and that's the leadership. If you've got a leadership in place that is not one that actually has the interests of the staff at heart, then you are going to struggle with that. That is going to be a problem. So it does, as with many things, has to start from the top, and that's really where sort of that importance of that comes from. I think other things as well is it's actually just encouraging the team to be a genuine team, and that's not just in necessarily the workload, but it's in actually doing other things together. It's like I don't know, having lunches together, having a break and doing something different, or taking in turns to make the drinks, something like all those daft sort of things.
So it's not just all on one person too.
Yeah.
I think, touching on what you've just mentioned there, we do a lot of HR training, HR consultancy, putting in compliance, if you want to call it that, but systems of work. But it's not just about making sure you're doing things correct legally. It's about making sure that, yes, you have to do things by certain legislation, but it's putting the employee at the forefront of everything, so you can draw out the information from that person, whether it be about their well-being at home or about how they're feeling in themselves. Even little things down to one-to-ones, so monthly one-to-ones, or I know we have a weekly catch-up, so we don't really have that formal one-to-one structure, but that weekly catch-up for us in this exact room is great for us because we can manage workloads between us. So if we're discussing all the client that we've got on, and all of a sudden when we're reviewing it, I go, Andrew, you've got 80% of all of our workload that's coming through. That for me would create a trigger for me to say, actually, we need to scale back a little bit, because or delegate to another person, because ultimately if your workload becomes unmanageable, that's when the well-being of you as a member of Brook will have to be monitored, because that's when stress starts to come in. That's when potential issues around workload management will then creep in. Are you then going to be worked too much, potentially? The margin for error, morale boost, all the things that we've talked around will then become a real mitigating factor, because sooner or later you're only one person, and that element of actually having that communication between us is essential in my eyes to making sure that we run this business correctly. Because I could just keep chucking work and manage this, manage that, manage the other thing, and not actually track it. And if you don't have that communication and upfront conversation between us, then we'll just keep doing as we've already done things, and cracks will show at some point.
And for me as well, though, that throws up a perfect example of, we talk about these things on these podcasts regularly, but we actually do live this. And for me, if I'm getting to that situation, I can quite comfortably come to you and say, hang on, Dom, I need a bit of support on this, or I need a bit of a break, because there's just too much for me to do, and know that will be received in that positive ways. Okay, so what can we do? What can we do between us to do it? Yeah,
exactly. And I guess once we get to that position, it'll be a really good position to be in, because we've got too much work on. Then we'll need to start to look at embedding that culture that we've got in the organisation by bringing someone else in and making sure that they eat, breathe and sleep everything that we're doing. But even just drawing it back to the non-work related things that we've done, just after lockdown, some of our members of staff here live at home on their own, and it can be quite an isolating environment to be in. So when we came back to the office, Barnsley Hospice was doing an accumulator challenge, so a fundraising challenge. So it was an idea of mine to say, actually, let's do a walk-in challenge. Let's walk up to the hospice. It's a mile away. We'll walk up there and back 50 times in the month, and so we have to accumulate 100